Hello. Happy New Year. It's still, you get to say Happy New Year for the whole month, right?
No, you
What?
don't. No, we said Happy New Year last week, because that was last week and it was the first one of the new year. We
Fine.
don't we don't
Okay,
get to
fine,
keep
fine.
back. We spoke about Christmas for months leading up to it.
You know how you told me you don't want me referring to you as a grumpy old man anymore? I think this is one of those times where your responses trigger me to say, please don't be a grumpy old man. But
Okay, no, touche, fair enough. Happy New Year. How are
it
you
is the
doing?
new year. The holidays are long over. Andrew is
Yeah,
very thankful that the holidays are long over,
I am.
and we get to dive back into some pretty meaty, serious material. We have a doctor with us today. I mean, this is legitimate. And I love this topic. I love this topic for associations. I love this topic for executives. I love this topic for many, many reasons. But we're excited to have Dr. Marc Reid with us today, author of You Are Not a Fraud, a Scientist's Guide to the Imposter Phenomenon, not
Very, very good.
syndrome, not syndrome. So you guys know each other though. We're going to have the audience is going to play this over and over just out of love for all the accents going on. So I'm going to keep my American to a minimum and just let you guys have at it. But how do you guys know each other? What's the story?
we were on a podcast together. Oh, four, maybe
At least
five,
4 years
four
ago.
years ago, at
Yeah.
least. I think your book was just about to be published. Maybe I'm not sure,
Oh,
but
yes, there wasn't any dust on it at that point.
indeed. So it's a long time ago, and I'm still faking it as a podcaster. I'm still thinking I don't belong here. And probably there's a fair few listeners who'd agree. But yeah, no, we it's such a pleasure to have you back on a recording, Mark. I'm delighted to see you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I am doing nothing other than resisting temptation to say Happy New Year to you both at the moment,
See,
Uh,
based on what you
see,
just said to one another.
yeah.
that's
I'm
the
not yet a
natural
card
human
carrying old
instinct.
man.
Why are
Yeah.
you doing this, Mark? Why are you doing this? You're just prodding the bear now, right? You just, just.
I'm a professional pot stirrer.
Well, maybe more importantly than how you two know each other, is it Dr. Reed or can we say Mark?
Dr. Reid is only for complaint letters and Sundays. I insist on Mark, please.
Okay,
Thank you
perfect.
very much.
So what got you passionate about this topic? How did you've given yourself to this. This is your complete singular area of focus. How did the imposter phenomenon really come to you
Hmm.
and become your life's work?
As if to continue stirring the pot, Elisa, it's actually because it wasn't my single area of focus. In fact, it was more of a real itch that I had to scratch in order to work on what I was most interested in and what my day job actually is. So if anyone Google stalks me, they'll find that I'm not a card carrying old man yet, but I am a card carrying chemist. So my day job is as a chemistry professor. I run a research team. I do all manner of things with pills and potions and everything that you would expect a chemist to do. However, outside of that, or on my way to becoming an independent academic, one of the things that really troubled me when I was moving from one job to another was how, with every move, I got increasingly more competent at Google stalking other people and finding out what their metrics were and coming up with every excuse to do, as Andrew said, think that I'm faking it until I make it and thinking that my boss at whatever time that happened to be was going to find me out and chuck me out of the workplace. So I was experiencing all of those behaviors at a real crunch point in my career, but also before I had ever heard of the terms imposter and syndrome put together in the same sentence, let alone right next door to one another. So I had no preconception, no plan to ever write a book. I actually spent about 2 years writing a diary to myself, really just to try to get thoughts out of my head about what was going on when I was becoming somewhat consumed by the supposed evidence that I wasn't good enough to be in the same room as my colleagues. And in fact, it was just all hearsay inside my head. Writing a diary was what I did because I didn't want to tell friends, didn't want to tell family, didn't want to tell my new wife at the time. I was just incredibly stubborn about it, but realized that if I am actually going to carve out the career that I'm interested in, something has to be done about this now, or there will be no career to speak of. And it was only several years after all of that stuff when I spoke to a friend over dinner, someone who I had did my PhD alongside. He convinced me to then try to pivot that very secret document that I had in my laptop and explore the possibility of a book project. And then several years after that, we find ourselves sitting talking on this podcast.
Well, I think you being a scientist, you have bosses, you're an expert in one way, but you're still doubting
Right.
yourself. I think this is so transferable for associations because
Mm.
so many association executives are experts in our own field, but
Yeah.
we serve at the will of, and we serve industries and professions that are not our own.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we are executives in what we do, but we may be working with a board of chemists and have no idea about
Yes.
chemistry, or
Yes.
not be qualified in their area of expertise in any way, shape, or form. I think this happens quite a bit with association executives and staff. I was talking to a
Yeah.
former client today, and she knew that the board did not respect her in the way that they
Mhm.
should, partially because she was not an expert in their field. She did not wear the same professional hat that they did. So I feel like association work is almost inclined to put you in that imposter or fraudulent mindset just by the nature of who we serve and how the structure works. Andrew, you've experienced this before.
Yeah, all the time. All the time. No, seriously,
Hmm.
I'm
Okay.
not joking. I'm not joking. Um I've never as you say, I'm an association professional. I understand my job inside out, but working with confident, competent professionals in a different industry or sector or environment context, it does it's very, very easy to see sort of seeds of doubt to be planted because yeah, like you say, you're only the only space you're occupying is your own head. You're not
Yeah.
occupying anyone else's around the table. So you only ever are projecting onto them what you are seeing in yourself. And yeah, I think in the membership world, it's certainly in the staff side of things, I think it's a huge issue. I think it undermines a lot of people's confidence and therefore their ability to really maximize their potential. And I'm sure that's the case. Mark, you've been hosting a podcast on a spin-off pod on the back of your book release, and I'm guessing you've spoken to people from all different types of industries and sectors who suffer with this phenomenon.
Yeah, let's talk about
Yes.
the word choice here. What
Okay.
is wrong with syndrome, and why
Hmm.
is phenomenon more important to describe this imposter experience?
Do you know when you say phenomenon, I just think of that Muppets,
Phenomenon.
yeah, that Muppets clip. I think we're going to put that somehow on the end of the pod.
Do, 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 do.
Exactly.
Well, if nothing else, it's a good way to remember what's about to come. In a nutshell, Elisa, that point on whether to say imposter phenomenon or syndrome is more than a pedantic point of English. The original research, this has been known for a long time, but when it was coined as the imposter phenomenon by the two psychologists who first sought to understand what these behaviors were all about and if they were in any way under an umbrella. And so, although it was first studied in academic researchers, female academic researchers who were trying to make their way into academia at a time when very few women were in academia, period. Um, I mention that because the misconception is that because that's where it started, that then people somehow think that it's only that subset of professionals who ever feel this way. Now that's incorrect, but that's a story for another time. But the syndrome versus phenomenon thing, it started as phenomenon precisely because those researchers knew that in using the word syndrome, they would be doing so incorrectly. And in fact, what they would actually be seeding are thoughts in people's mind that they are somehow moments away from being diagnosed with a disease, right? Syndrome in the medical literature means an ailment that has not yet been categorized or diagnosed as a specific disease. So to put that more simply, when you call it imposter syndrome, or what if people say associate themselves with having imposter syndrome, what they're saying in another form of words is there is something wrong with me. And that's absolutely not the case, because all of the behaviors, be it, simply doubting yourself or comparing yourself to others or feeling that your knowledge is not as good as someone else is more qualified for the position. All of that are par for the course when you're moving from one association to another or one institution to another. But by definition, when you move on to that new role, you should be the one who is not expert in the room.
Yeah, and I suppose. Oh, sorry, Elise, go on. No, go on, you go.
No, people want to hear you. It's fine.
Oh, thank you. I suppose, to a degree, as you say, when you're the new person in the room,
Yes.
as it were, a degree of imposter phenomenon is not an unhealthy thing, because to recognize that you're not perhaps equipped with the same level of knowledge or skills or expertise or experience in a certain subject, field, industry, profession, etc. That's not a bad thing, to be self-aware and to recognize that, I guess. But then there's obviously a tipping point where that self-awareness sort of becomes
it's whether
almost self-fulfilling, doesn't it? It becomes almost self-fulfilling. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Lise, go on.
It's whether it motivates you or whether it haunts you.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And I love the differential, the new word. It's going to take a minute for me to break myself from syndrome just because of the usage. But I think of this also in terms of a new board member. How often, Andrew, do we work with board members, officers, or just directors or trustees or whatever it may be, and after their term is over, they confess to how insecure they felt, how uncertain they were in their role or their charge. And so for the majority of their time, they simply sit quiet, almost paralyzed by this phenomenon. And it's such a wasted opportunity for someone selected to a leadership position who is not empowered to utilize that platform to do good, to make change because of what they're experiencing, in their heads.
Yeah. This is deeply fascinating to me for a number of reasons. The first being, Elisa, the fact that you mentioned that these revelations come after the term, not before or during. And it relates very much to what I still, when I'm giving my own workshops on all of this stuff, the number one darkest, scariest statistic that I share with people that I found while I was writing the book was that about 20% or 1 in 5 people will never, ever tell a living soul that they've ever felt this way. And partly because of that association with it being somehow a syndrome, which it isn't, that this is not something that one should confess to feeling, when in fact that the response that is conjured up in someone when they feel this way is not only natural, but it's healthy and can be very, very effective, because it signals that high level of self-awareness that you've got some work to do, and perhaps continuous work to do, in order to be the competent professional in that particular role. So it's much of this is the soapbox that I stand on for all of this is I could have written a book titled, or having some sort of title involving imposter syndrome. It would have sold a lot more. But the whole point of that is that if you continue that trend, it will never, ever go away.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So if I'm just trying to get my head around this. Sorry, it's taking me a while to articulate my thoughts this afternoon. I'm sorry. It's obviously a New Year hangover still.
But while you gather yourself, Andrew, can I ask, why is this still the case? Coming out of the pandemic, I mean, I thought we accept vulnerability now. I thought we accept wellness and work-life balance and all of these things that we say we accept. Why is it still the case that someone would be afraid to even admit this, whether to themselves or to someone else? I mean, aren't we supposed to be more empathetic than ever before, not only with ourselves and with others? Or is that just a falsehood?
Oh, I think that there are multiple overlapping circles in this Venn diagram, one of which is, a concept that really opened my eyes to what you're asking about is known as something like preference falsification. People will often say one thing when they actually feel another, and that can be due to personal embarrassment or, political preferences. It can be a lot of different things.
What
And
is
there
this called
is
again? Wait, what is this called again?
preference falsification.
Oh, okay. Google that.
Right. So yeah, put a fancy label around it, right? But it helps just put a label on it. But what it really is getting to back to your question, Elisa, is there's a big difference between I and we. For a lot of these things, we will signal things as a group because, as Seth Godin always says, people like us do things like this, right? However, people like me might be thinking something very different from people like we. So there's maybe personal embarrassment. There's maybe a misconception that vulnerability is not as valued as it actually presently is. There could be myriad things going on in someone's head, and this is the problem with never being able to, stick a plug in the side of someone's ear and actually see what they're thinking on a TV. And that's why I held so dear that very dark statistic that 1 in 5 people would never tell anyone. And it's probably reflecting back on where I was when I started all of this. I did not want to tell anyone. So everything that I have done since then has been to help manage what's in my head rather than immediately profess to be evangelizing this for other people who read a book or go to a workshop.
And I think I understand exactly what you're saying, Lisa, about, the last few years, there has been a significant sort of shift in terms of how we expect management or leadership to appreciate, to demonstrate empathy, and for there to be a more human side of the in the workplace. But I don't think it's in practice that common. I mean, we know that sadly, I mean, you and I have run sessions where we're talking about, trust in the workplace, trust in the boardroom, um, talking about vulnerability based trust and psychological safety nets. And people nod, but they don't necessarily um, recognize it as being
Exactly.
actual in their environments. I mean, when you look at the world of and you've heard me say this before, Lisa, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, for example, everything is predicated on success. We're amazing. Everything we do is fantastic. We've got all this incredible experience, expertise, skills. Why would you not want to employ us? Nothing on anything I put out the door says, "Go on, I made some disastrous mistakes. I've lost
Yep.
jobs. I've upset people. I've hurt people. I've caused problems because I've made, this, that, and the other. Oh, I was, by the way, human." We don't ever talk about that. We don't ever talk about it. So I do understand why 20% of, and I am going to say, I know we're not talking about syndrome, but we're talking about phenomenon, but I am going to say sufferers because I think
Yeah.
it's something that you can suffer
Yeah. I would buy
in
that.
silence, and it doesn't surprise. In fact, I think I'm probably surprised that it's only 20% of people who
Well,
are
no, that's
who are.
that's not quite right. So
Have I
so
not?
this is good enough to rudely interrupt you, Andrew,
Go
because
for
what
it.
one of
Go
the
for it.
things
Elisa does
I've
it all the time, so you may as well join in as well. I'm vulnerable enough to be interrupted, I'll tell you that.
good man. Okay, so what the reason I interrupted you was is that you're right to cite what I've said twice in the podcast already, that 20% of people will never tell a living soul. The more accurate way I should have said that, if I put my academic hat on, is that 20% of people who came forward to talk about this at all
Yeah, right.
admitted to never telling anyone. Because one of the things I found when I was doing a lot of the research behind the book was that some people would actually come forward. So when I say come forward, I'd put together, alongside a friend of mine, essentially a psychological survey made up of a traditional psychology exercise, details don't matter right now, and some open-ended questions where people could write diary style about their own experience. It was the case that we got maybe 800 at the time. It's well over 1,000 now, having done it through workshops, people going through that entire exercise and being willing to give over that experience as part of a larger data set, which has been invaluable. At the same time, I met many people during that whole exercise writing the book that would start the process and become uncomfortable in their reflections enough to say, actually, I want to back out. And then
Right.
that's
Okay.
none of that is considering the people who might be feeling this way, but would never ever dare dream of coming
Still
forward to
not
take
saying
part
it.
in a
Yeah.
study. So there's
That
so
makes
much
sense.
dark data. And this is why I always take articles on the subject with a pinch of salt, because any stat that's quoted in there is quoting the data that you did get, not the data that you couldn't capture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
And
fascinating.
so as people, whether they're a part of these, well, let me start this way. There are
Mm.
those who know that they have experienced this, that they have
Yes.
felt this phenomenon. There are those who may not and just suffer differently. How do we translate this, Andrew, to our side of the world, our area of expertise? Is there something that we can do? And I think for the staff approach versus the board member approach, it's very different. It has to
Yeah.
be more than just saying we have a culture where failure is
Yeah.
accepted. That's,
Absolutely.
I'm not going to cuss this year, so that's not really happening. How do we?
Mark's only met you about 20 minutes ago, and even he's laughing at that statement.
Yeah, yeah.
It's only because it's helping me to hold back the expletives as well. I use swear words as a comma because I'm from Glasgow.
Exactly. No, I mean we're going to try to clean it up this year. We want to keep our PG-13 rating.
Well,
Um,
I think it's interesting because what I've been thinking about, we talk about imposter phenomenon, and it is very much about, and I understand why this is the case. It's very much about what I am internalizing, my lack of confidence, my fears around, my competence, but also
it's
what
what
I'm
you think other
projecting
people think
and what
about
I'm
you.
projecting other people think about me.
Yeah.
Why do we not talk
Correct.
about imposters? I'm thinking about some of the people in the membership world. Why do we not talk about imposter phenomenon? About the people, who clearly we recognize are not competent in what they're doing, but they
Yeah.
believe they are. And
Oh, this is so good. Yes, I felt so strongly about this that I wrote an entire chapter of "You Are Not a Fraud" around this, and it is now that I use it as an exercise in workshops. The whole idea of this starts with recognizing the difference between competence and confidence.
mm,
And there's a story that I love telling about this, where back in the 90s there was a bank robber by the name of MacArthur Wheeler. And he thought he was so good at robbing banks that he tried to rob two in one day. And not only that, he tried to do so without any mask or any disguise. And the reason that he did that is because he had found out, and I love this because I'm a chemist, that he found out that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink, and you can only see it when it heats up. So he surmised that he could cover his face in lemon juice and that would be enough to obscure his face from video cameras. So, and this guy was entirely stunned when the police turned up at his door about an hour after he appeared on the news. Like he had no idea that it was so likely that he would be caught. And that has become somewhat of psychological folklore for people studying things like the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is
mhm.
really the closest we have to an opposite of the
Yeah,
so-called imposter
right.
syndrome, where you've got people who are desperately incompetent, but they're completely unaware of it. And sometimes that's malicious, but sometimes it's not. And it's
No.
in fact it's been
Yeah.
studied in people who, will sit particular tests for particular areas of intelligence. And it simply boils down to they might guess that they've done better than what they actually have. So that it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily have to have malicious intent. But where we've tried to go further in workshops is people will get into groups and they'll do more like what you're alluding to, Andrew, which is
Mm-hmm.
they'll go out and search for stories from the news where someone has genuinely been convicted of fraud
Mm-hmm.
or has genuinely been found out as an imposter, so that
Mm-hmm.
people can start to see that there's a genuine definition of these words, and there's a definition that you are labeling yourself against, which is entirely
Mm-hmm.
false. And
Mm-hmm.
as obvious as that can sound, a lot of people take that exercise as the hard evidence they needed to see for the penny to actually
To
drop that
drop.
they're in fact not an imposter.
But so
That's
much of this is
fascinating.
about perception.
Yeah.
They're
Yes,
in any role,
yes,
job description or otherwise, there's never going to be a clear and hard and fast definition of competence and what success is. It's
hmm,
all going to be based on your perception of yourself and your
yeah,
perception of others' perceptions of you. And I think this external perception has been heightened by social media. We all think everyone's else's lives are perfect, and so we're measuring ourselves with a different criteria.
Mm-hmm.
I just it blows my mind that there's so much science around this,
yeah,
given how much of it is internal chemical reactions, within our own brain, our
That's a
own
good point.
behaviors, our own
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
personality.
yeah.
I really want to figure out how to give someone a chance to either avoid this
Mm.
in a new role by stating realistic expectations or opportunities for feedback,
Hmm,
or a safe
hmm,
place for questions.
right,
What are the tools to help someone, whether they're already in an imposter loop or
yeah.
or not yet? How does someone prepare themselves or prepare others to avoid this? And maybe avoidance is not realistic.
I would start exactly what you've finished by acknowledging that none of it is actually about avoidance or crushing or curing or smashing. This whole experience, it's about managing it. It's a pivot from what you currently see as being a hard and fast enemy to one that's an old friend. And the reason that I stress that so much is that the whole definition of this imposter experience is not low self-esteem. It is a timely bout of self-doubt, not meaning to rhyme those things, with the fact that you have ambition and direction. So it happens specifically to ambitious people who are trying something new or are going for a new role in their workplace or are trying a new career entirely. Right. I say this in every workshop as well. It's like, it's not because you're lazy that you feel this way. It's precisely the opposite of that.
Mm.
So the reason then that you have to start with that acknowledgement that this is not about avoidance is that precisely because you're the sort of person who probably will not finish here, you will have another goal, another ambition, another direction that you will go. And that sort of resets things such that you will once again be the person who doesn't know as much as anyone else. You will have new colleagues to whom you will compare yourself. You will have these triggers reset such that if you didn't have tools to manage it, then you'll go back to square one and you'll have the disappointment of thinking, I thought I had crushed this thing or avoided it last time. Why is it coming up again? So when you're in the framework of management, then you can actually start to use the genuine immediate tools of managing it, like the diary level tools that will help you downplay the next time that it comes up, even though it will never go away. So,
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
example, something you mentioned earlier, you mentioned the differences between, let's say, and I'll paraphrase here, the staff and let's say the executives or board members or C-suite folk. Now, one of the things that's a real trouble is what Andrew mentioned in relation to that with how your LinkedIn profile looks. And one of the things that I now put on my own website to practice what I'm about to preach is this. You have your CV, but you should also have your CV of failures. So the way to do this as an exercise is that everyone will have some, at least, visual of what their CV currently looks like and all the bullet points and accolades and previous roles and maybe even the testimonials. But very few people have anything on the blank page that should consist of all the times things never worked out, all the jobs you got rejected from, all the businesses that failed, whatever that happens to be in, that exercise of showing not what went well, but the fullness of your efforts can be a really reassuring personal piece to show that you've put a lot more into this than what you've got out. And more than that, it can help show those in your care, if you're a leader, that your knowledge and your expertise were not divinely inspired upon you. Like this was something where you had to go through the mire yourself in order to get to where you are. You are as human as the people you lead.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. This isn't about cure. This isn't about avoidance. This really is about awareness and management. And I guess I'd admit I don't want to get rid of this. I think there is motivation in it. I think it can be a driver. Maybe something that I know I've found others that feel they're experiencing this as well. And there's a connection. Okay, here's how it's affected me. Here's why I feel this way. You mentioned in science, the females and minorities feeling this more so because they look around and they don't see others like them, or they have a different road to hoe along the way. And I think this really just is about heightened awareness and preparing for it in a way that can have a positive outcome versus paralyzing you or holding you back. But for board members, it may be something we can address a little more directly, so
I think so.
They know it's okay to it's okay to ask questions, that you're not expected to come into this seat and be an expert. Andrew, I'll give you the last word here as we finish up. But this is so interesting. I'm gonna have to dive in and order one of Dr. Reid's books.
Well, I just was going to say, I think this is one of those. This is one of those. You mean you haven't already?
You know what?
What's propping up your desk?
I didn't even pay Andrew to say that.
No, he just wanted to make me look foolish. This is how we handle our imposter phenomenon, is we just bust on each other to the point that
to the point where people think that we're married, which has happened several times. Talk about imposter syndrome. I think you're absolutely spot on there, Lise, in terms of how I think obviously there is a certain amount of self responsibility around this. I mean, if one is feeling something, to be self-aware enough to use the tool, some of the tools that I mean, Marc, what you'd mapped there, what you described there as that CV of failure. Actually, do you know what? That's like, I know. Lisa's like, I don't know, but I actually love and hate that idea. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to hate doing it. No, you're
not.
But I am actually.
Can I share with you the compromise to love it more than hate it?
Yeah.
Is if you're doing it with a group of people, as I always do, you can do it anonymously. Because then what you're doing is writing it down for yourself, and you're able to share it for others to show them that in the room, no one is perfect, and you've not given away your identity if you don't want to do so.
I love that idea. I mean, the thing is, I guess I'm at a point in my career and my age where I don't actually care anymore. I'm kind of past that point. I was a chief executive before I was 40, and I was suffering with the phenomenon because I felt grossly inexperienced when I finally got into the role. I felt that I shouldn't be there, and that they'd made a monumental mistake, and they had. But subsequently, as the years have gone by, and I spend a lot of time with chief execs and et cetera, and I realized that it was the right place for me to be at that time. And so I think I've got to the point now where I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem telling people that I've made mistakes and what those mistakes were. I don't, but I appreciate that actually, for a lot of people, that is a challenge to admit to yourself, never mind to show to other people. But the piece around just recognizing the whole of your efforts rather than merely the successful outcomes. It recognizes that, and we talk about systems a lot. Elisa and I do a lot around systems management, and the whole body and the brain and the psyche and your emotions and your mental health, it's all part of one system. And so actually you have to see it all within that context rather than just looking at, well, this is the good stuff I did, and therefore that's how I'm defining who I am. I think that's a really great way of sort of recognizing it, and a really fascinating tool to address imposter phenomenon. Then,
Well, and
yeah, I
maybe
love
we
it.
should have
Thank you.
we should have a second part of this from the context of consultancy and when you're trying to sell yourself, when you are a speaker, when you are a coach, when you are a mentor, when you are a consultant, and how to balance professional competence with accessibility and being a real person. I don't want to work with a consultant that thinks they're an expert and has nothing else to learn. I want to work with a real person. This has so many different layers, and Marc, we're so thankful for you joining us today. You are not a fraud.
Asking me to be here.
I know. Oh, well, so taking us up on the invitation. Okay. So we twisted your arm. But A Scientist's Guide to Imposter Phenomenon, I think a great starting point for the new year as we commit to self-awareness, to being authentic, and to maybe cutting ourselves some slack sometimes when we're the hardest ones on ourselves in these challenging environments. So thank you so much for coming to visit. We'll ask you back. I know you do workshops, you do speaking. Please check it all out at dr-marc.reid.com, and we'll put all the links in the show notes. Good luck with your podcast and all that you are doing. And until next time, put your members and your mission first.